Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. It was 6 years of life that he'll never get back, but Lieutenant Colonel Al Meyer will never forget that time, from the spring of 1967 to the spring of '73, that he spent as a captive of the North Vietnamese Army, a POW. Sitting in the back seat of his F-105, he was shot out of the sky. His pilot did not make it. Today, Al Meyer, A&M class of 1960, and his wife Bobbie live in rural Brazos County, where most of his reminders are indeed in his memory. For Bobbie Meyer, the memory is that of waiting with two young boys, not knowing for 2.5 years that her missing in action husband was indeed alive and a prisoner. It's a story as compelling as you've heard yet on Veterans of the Valley. Al Meyer, it's an honor to have you here today. We need to fast forward through a lot of your story because we want to get to the story of your imprisonment in Vietnam. But I know that you were Aggie class of 1960 and you joined the Air Force. Why the Air Force, and talk about your job and what you were trained for?
Oh, okay. Well, I joined the Air Force because I had a teacher in high school that said he was in the Air Force, or at that time Army Air Corps in World War II, and he flew B-29s. Said he was out in the middle of a battle every day, but he had a nice, clean, warm bed to sleep in at night. So I figured the Air Force was for me. So
little did you know what was coming up. But talk about your job and your training. I know you went to El Paso, from El Paso where it was hot to Duluth, Minnesota, where it was 30 below. But during this time, you were trained as an electronic warfare officer. Talk about what that job was and what it entailed.
Well, electronic warfare officer, most of us went to B-52s and sat in the back of the B-52 and operated the electronic defenses for the B-52, the jammers and things like that to jam the enemy radar. And that's what most of our class went to. I went to Air Defense Command and flew in B-57s, which was a light bomber. And our job was to fly targets for the Nike Air Defense missile training, and then also for fighter interceptor pilot training. We would jam their radars while they tried to intercept us and simulate shooting us down. Yeah,
you got orders to go to Thailand, and you got your exact training for combat and what you were going to do in Las Vegas. And that was kind of a fast track, I understand. They put about 5 or 6 months worth of training into about 3 weeks, is that right?
In 3 weeks, yes.
And that was in Las Vegas, right?
Right. We had, the first morning we had a little bit of academics. They showed us how the ejection seat in the 105 worked, and they showed us how the equipment that we were going to be working with worked. And then we got in the airplane and we flew 13 missions. We went out to the gunnery range and fired the guns. We dropped bombs, and then we worked against the SAC RBS sites. They had the SA-2 simulators, which the Soviet missiles, the SA-2. And they had the radar simulators. We had the equipment to home in on this radar. And so we practiced against the RBS sites at St. George, Utah, and Hawthorne, Nevada.
You were stationed in Thailand, and then in January, late January of 1967, that's when you arrived in Thailand. Talk about your first flight. You actually were on your first flight before you were even officially there.
Yes, before I had signed in. Well, I arrived late one afternoon and went to personnel, and they told me that to come back the next morning at 9 o'clock. So I went back down to the squadron, and they had us on a flying schedule, and so we went flying. We got up at 2 o'clock that morning, and we had a 4 o'clock in the morning takeoff. And it was pitch black. We took off, and the air conditioning system on the F-105 doesn't come on until the gears retracted. And when we got off the runway and retracted the gear, there was a large rice bug came out of the air conditioning in the front cockpit, and the pilot says, "You got it." And so I had to stick, and you know, it was pitch black out there. There were no visual references, and they had taken most of our flight instruments out of the back seat. And so I was trying to maintain wings level and positive rate of climb and not stall the airplane until he got through with the rice bug. And every once in a while he'd swat the stick, and the airplane would wobble a little bit. And he finally killed the rice bug, and so we went on with the mission.
And you were sure glad. That was your first enemy in Vietnam, was a rice bug, right?
Right.
Yeah, but you were able to defeat it. Right. Your mission number 35. Talk about mission number 35 and how that certainly changed your life.
Well, mission number 35, we were scheduled to fly, but we had the lowest priority for getting an airplane. If they had 4 F models that were going to be in commission, then we were going to go on a mission. And we thought it so highly impossible that we didn't even order lunch when all the other people ordered lunch. And we were going to go eat after it was all over with. And, but anyway, they put us on a flying schedule, and they had 4 Fs in commission, and so here we went off to North Vietnam. The target that day was an electrical switching station, which was in a building inside a dirt revetment, which we had tried to bomb 2 or 3 times before, never had been able to hit that building.
Right.
And so we got to the beginning of what we call Thud Ridge, which was a ridge which sort of pointed toward Hanoi like a finger, and you could fly down that ridge. And if they fired a missile at you from one side, then you could dodge to the other side to get away from the missile. And but when we got there, it was very cloudy, and we called back to we were 4 minutes ahead of the mission lead, and the mission commander, and we called back to him and told him that it was all cloudy, and he says, "Well, go take a look. There may be a hole over Hanoi." So I remember that, and I remember we were above the clouds, and the missile popped out of the cloud and exploded right above the airplane.
And that's pretty much where your memory ends right
then.
That
ends right there.
Until you woke up.
In a bamboo hut.
In a bamboo. Now, somewhere in there, you don't remember it, but obviously both you and the pilot were able to eject.
Right.
The pilot, as you said, eventually did not make it, but you did. And your next memory in a bamboo hut, and you woke up, opened your eyes, and what did you see?
Well, I saw a whole bunch of very vicious Vietnamese, and they were asking me if I was Russian, and of course I told them I was American. I probably should have told them I was Russian, but anyway, they became very vicious. They spit on me. They twisted my broken leg. I had a broken leg. I had cuts and burns and bruises all over my body, and they had stripped all my clothes off, which that was probably a good thing that I was unconscious when they did that, because some of the guys that were conscious when they took their clothes off, you know, the snaps and buckles and zippers and so on really baffled them, so they just took the clothes off with a machete. So they say it was quite a scary experience.
I'll bet it was.
And
the North Vietnamese Army then showed up, and they put you on a Jeep and sort of paraded you around a little bit, right?
Well, yeah, it was the trip to Hanoi, but
right.
Every time we went through a village, they would stop in the village, and they would roll up the side curtains on the truck and let the villagers come look at me, and they would hit me with their hands and fists and twist my broken leg and things like that. And probably the most vicious of these people were the ones that had the red lips and teeth from chewing betel nuts.
The women.
Those women were very vicious people, and you know, they were really mean. You know, as far as hitting and spitting and twisting my broken leg and so on.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine.
We did this in every village that we stopped. Sometimes the crowd would get out of control, and the guard that was in the back of the truck with me would jab them with the bayonet or hit them over the head with his rifle to get them to back up or threaten to shoot them. And you know, he'd finally get him backed up, and because he was fearing for his own life.
Talk about the interrogations that you went through, really throughout, and what the interrogations involved. I think the first person that interrogated you was actually a Swedish doctor who you remember as looking like Bob Barker from The Price is Right.
Right.
Talk about that.
Yes. The day after I was shot down, they stopped in a town somewhere, and at a hospital, and there was a doctor there that spoke very good English, and he looked like Bob Barker, and I was later told he was Swedish. He was a personal friend of Ho Chi Minh. And he told me that he had connections to the International Red Cross. And he could get a letter out for me, and of course at that time I didn't think I was going to live anyway, so I really wasn't that interested in getting a letter out. And then he wanted to talk about things like what kind of an airplane did I fly, and I wouldn't tell him, and he got mad at me. And I don't know, I guess he was the one that supervised putting a cast on my leg, but they put a cast on my leg.
Yeah.
And then when I came to again, they put me on that truck again, and we started back toward Hanoi, and we stopped at all the villages, same routine as the day before. And even at night, those people don't sleep at night. There's always somebody awake. And when they pulled into a village, there were always people awake, even in the middle of the night. And
when you got to Hanoi, you were placed in what is very commonly known as the Hanoi Hilton.
Yes.
A prison. Talk about that, what kind of an experience that was initially. And the interrogation that went on there was different. It was a little bit different, a little bit more intense, right?
Right, it was. When I got there, you know, they try to do things to me and I'd pass out. And, you know, you can't torture someone that's unconscious. And so they kept telling me that if I didn't talk to them, I wouldn't get any medical care and then I was going to die. So I held out for a while and then I figured, well, I don't have anything to lose but my life. And so I'll talk to them. And I started to tell them that that first question was what kind of an airplane was in. I told them 105, and then the next question was D model or F model. The D model being the single seat and the F model being the two seat. And I told him a D model because I had decided I was going to tell him I was an F-105 pilot rather than an EWO, because I figured they'd have fewer questions for a pilot than they would an EWO. Mm-hmm. And so he immediately told me that I was lying to him because he knew that I was from an F-105F and that I was an EWO, and he had just talked to my pilot, Major Dudash.
So they knew the answers pretty much to the questions before they asked. They just wanted to know how trustworthy you were going to be with your answers, right?
Right. And of course, then they went and they really didn't want a whole lot of intelligence. The big question was, what were the next targets? Mm-hmm. And that was something that we didn't even know, because we would always receive the targets the night before we actually went to bomb these targets, because they would come in from Washington. And we would receive a number. Each target in North Vietnam had a Joint Chiefs of Staff number, a JCS number, and you know, we would get the number of which target we were supposed to bomb the next day. So we didn't know ahead of time what they were going to be. And so, you know, they kept pressing. I finally, you know, I made up some, and I told him Phu Quyen Airfield and the Doomer Bridge, which were always off limits for us. We flew over them every day, but they wouldn't let us bomb those things. Mm-hmm. So. In the docks in Haiphong, and then he stopped me and he says the docks in Haiphong are in Route Pack 6 Bravo, and he says that's Navy operational area. So he knew it was the Navy's area, not the Air Force. And
you went to what they called a Heartbreak Hotel. There was also another portion of that you all called Little Las Vegas, because the different areas were named after clubs. Like you were in, I think, the one called the Golden Nugget, right? Right. Is that right?
Yeah, Heartbreak Hotel was, you would go to the interrogation room, you stayed there until they finished interrogating you, and then they would take you to what they called Heartbreak Hotel, and it was a real heartbreaker, because here you finally came to the realization of what had happened to you and so on, and I stayed there, I don't remember how long, 3 or 4 days, and I was lying on the floor, since I was in a body cast from my chest all the way down to the bottom of my foot.
You spent how long on your back? You were shot down in April till August, is that right?
I was flat on my back for 3 months.
For 3 months.
And I didn't get a bath during that time, and smelled pretty ripe.
Lieutenant Colonel Meyer has some photographs. Some of them are from a sketchbook that was sketched by one of the fellow POWs, and we'd like to go to some of the pictures that were taken of him, and some from this sketchbook, so you can get somewhat of an idea of what he's talking about in this POW camp. You can see right there on the monitor, Lieutenant Colonel Meyer, some of the pictures that you have brought. Talk about them. There's the F-105, right?
Yeah, it's the F-105 F model, and the one in the background there is the D model, the single seat 105. And we usually flew at least 2 F models in a flight, and then 2 other F models or 2 other D models, okay, depending on what we had available to fly that day.
All right, next picture, I think we'll move on to it. There's a close-up, and that's actually
that was our personal airplane, had our pictures on it. I don't know if you can read that, but the rear canopy had my name on it. So
that's quite a craft. This is obviously a sky shot of the imprisonment, or Hanoi. You talk about that. What are we looking at?
Okay, that's downtown Hanoi. This was taken by a drone aircraft, a pilotless aircraft, took these pictures in December of 1972. And the building there with the large building with the white roof, that's the Ministry of Justice. And then just to the right of that is the Wallow Prison. And the prison had 20-foot high walls around it with glass on top of it, and it had about a 30-foot no man's land, and then all the cells open to the inside of that compound. Mm-hmm. And from right here, I can't see well enough to. Okay, there's
that's a close-up of the Hanoi Hilton.
Yeah, if at the bottom of the picture is the large portion, which is where we all ended up later on after they had a raid at Sante and they brought us all together in one camp. We were in that large portion in the back.
Okay.
But that upper left portion up there, that was the what they called it Little Vegas. And the reason they called it Little Vegas, most of the guys there were 105 pilots and they trained in Las Vegas. So
I see.
And then just that roof line that goes through the middle of it there, that's where the Heartbreak Hotel was. And then up in that large compound in the upper right-hand corner there is where they had the interrogation rooms, which they call New Guy Village.
Okay, let's move on with the next picture. Now, these are from the sketchbook. That
Right.
who was the artist?
The person that did that name was Mike McGrath. He was one of my cellmates.
Okay.
And he was a very talented artist. And
So you get an idea of what we're talking about. There's
that's Heartbreak Hotel. They had concrete bunks.
Right.
And they had those stocks at the foot of the bunk. They would put people's feet in there. Sometimes they put one foot in one side and they put two wrists in the other one.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes they put the 2 feet in and put a handcuff on one arm.
And they could actually lock it from the outside. You see
Right.
there to the right, they just push that bar in from
Right.
the outside, and that would lock it. Okay, next photo. Let's go to that one. Now this is interesting. This is your communication code here.
Right. They've kept us isolated from each other. They didn't even allow us to see each other or talk to each other. And communicating or talking to someone in the next cell was, if you got caught doing that, would get you a severe beating. And but we had a tap code. We'd tap on the walls, or sometimes take us out to work, sweeping leaves or tamping dirt, which made a lot of noise. And you could do that to the 5x5 rhythm and send messages.
Yeah.
And so we sent messages all over the camp that way. The way it worked was you take the alphabet and you eliminate the K, and in place of a K, you use a C. And the first set of taps is the row across. The second
across the top?
Right.
Okay, so if you wanted to say hi to somebody, you'd go 3 times and then 2 times, that would be an H, and then you go 4 times and 2 times, and that would be an I.
Yeah.
Did I get that right? I could have done that.
So
Yeah.
and some people were very proficient at that. They could rattle that stuff off the wall like
I bet they could.
nobody's business after doing that for years.
Let's go on to the next picture there. Here's another sketch. What are we looking at there real quick?
That's just one of our, a bunk. That's where we slept. We slept on boards. We had a little rice straw mat that we slept on, and we had 2 blankets, which Hanoi is in a tropical area, but it did get cold there in the winter, and 2 blankets were really not too much. It was quite cold.
Okay,
and
next,
of course
next
the summers
picture.
were very hot. And this is another way that we communicated was by rolling up a blanket like a donut and then putting your face inside the blanket up against the wall, and it muffled your voice so you couldn't be heard outside. And if you talked in a high squeaky voice, it would carry better through the wall than if you talked in a deep voice. And so, the guy on the other side was listening with his cup.
Okay, let's go on.
And that's after we were released. That's me and another Aggie, John Blevins from class of 1961. This was taken in Hawaii. We were on a 141 being taken from the Philippines to Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio. And they stopped in Hawaii to refuel for 2 hours, and they let us off the airplane, and they had all kinds of things for us in base operations.
I'll bet they did. It's a great picture.
And
here you are.
That's the 141 flight from Hanoi to Philippines. That's me getting off the airplane, and the admiral there to the right is Admiral Naylor, who at the time was commander of Pacific Forces.
And he was welcoming you back home. Boy,
Right.
what a memorable moment. I'm one of the people that's old enough to remember these things being broadcast on television when the POWs came home. Amazing. Let's go on to the next one. Here's we're going to talk a little bit later about a time that you were caught smarting off during an interrogation, and you had to sort of go through this exercise for a couple of days, right?
Right. They did that to me for 2 days out in the hot sun. When I passed out, they would beat me until I got back up. So I went through that for 2 days.
Okay, let's move on. Here we got going back into the prison camp again. What's that?
Inside the cells when one guy would tap on the walls, and however other many people were in the cells, they would look underneath the doors or out the windows or the vent holes or whatever, watching for guards. And our signal for danger was 1 cough. And then 2 coughs was all clear. So that's how we watched. And that was
I like that picture.
when we landed in Hawaii to refuel. These women were some friends of my wife. Their husbands had been stationed here at A&M, and they had made friends with my wife. And
but that's a great sign for you to see.
yeah,
Absolutely. Wow. Okay. And there's
that's color guard at Kelly Air Force Base. When we arrived at Kelly Air Force Base, they sent us to the nearest large hospital to our home.
where you lived.
And there's another picture of it from another angle.
And that picture says all that it needs to say. What do you remember what you were thinking when that picture was taken of you and Bobbie?
Oh, I don't know. I was very happy about it.
Pretty overwhelming.
Yes.
For both of you.
Yes, it was.
Wow. Incredible, incredible. When you were at the Hanoi Hilton, your senior ranking officer, American senior ranking officer, very interesting, was Admiral James Stockdale.
In the Little Vegas, yes, the very first one, yes.
People might remember Admiral Stockdale as the running mate of Ross Perot.
Yes.
Admiral Stockdale just passed away this past summer.
Right.
But how do you remember Admiral Stockdale?
Well, I just remember the policies that he had sent out. You know, don't give them anything without torture, and no escaping unless you have outside help. And he had a few other policies. I don't remember what all of them were, but they were passed on to us, and we were only there for about a week, and then we left. But his wife was the one that organized all the wives, which they had the League of Families, and they were the ones that sold the POW bracelets to raise money for the campaign and so on. And that probably helped a whole lot with our treatment getting better in 1969.
Let's. We need to fast forward a little bit. Let's fast forward to that. I know you got to the point to where you were able to actually intermingle with other POWs later on. That was obviously a significant change from the isolationism to actually being able to talk to other POWs.
Yes.
And the treatment did get better in September of 1969. The food better. You got some air vents.
Right.
Sort of talk about that change and what you all thought that was all about.
Well, we didn't really know what it was all about. We thought maybe we're going home soon or something, but that didn't really happen. But they did. It was right after Ho Chi Minh died, and it was also the same time that the wives were starting to campaign here in this country to get better treatment for us and so on. And the treatment changed drastically overnight. There were no longer any beatings or torture. There were a few of them. Somebody that really got out of line, like 72, when they resumed bombing, one of the guys cheered, and they took him out and beat him quite severely. But you know, for the most part, the real rough stuff stopped, and the interrogations, which, well, we called them quizzes. They were more interested in your political views than anything, or you know, what the status of your family was.
Right, your social status.
Right.
Exactly.
And that was the big interest.
I remember asking you because we're talking over a 6-year period here, and I remember asking you, what was your day-to-day routine? What did you do? Very interesting what you told me. You talked about how you all would actually talk out movies that you had seen or books that you have read. There was one fellow, I think you said, that actually had in his memory 200 movies that he'd go through the whole movie. So you would actually watch movies through the memories of fellow POWs.
Right.
Watch them in your mind, that is.
And then we have some people taught classes, and we had one individual went to SMU and passed the test for German, French, and Spanish from the languages that he learned in POW camp.
So you sort of had class,
right,
so to speak. You had teachers that taught, you had people that remembered movies, and later you would see movies and you would, as you saw them on the screen, you would remember those movies being told to you while you were a POW. Let's talk about, we got about just about 2.5 minutes left now. Let's talk about when you went home in 1973 real quick. Talk about how that all came about.
Oh, okay. They we were in a camp up on the Chinese border, and they took us to Hanoi. And we were in Hanoi, and they read the agreements to us that they had made in Paris about releasing POWs, and each of us was given a copy of these agreements. And so we knew when we were going to come home pretty much. I was very solidly in the second group. They was going to be sick and wounded first, and then was going to be by date of capture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was pretty solidly in the middle of the second group, depending on how many sick and wounded there were going to be, and I think there were 30-some sick and wounded. And then on February the 12th, the first group went home, and
then there was a longer delay between the first group and the second group. You didn't get to go home when you thought you were going to get to go home.
Right. They lined us up in the courtyard one night, and the camp commander told us that, you know, today was the day for you to go home, but the United States is not living up to the agreement, so you're not going to get to go home. And so morale dropped, and then about a week later, you know, things started getting a little better, and on Sunday, March the 4th, the 141s showed up, and they took us to the airport, and we got on the 141s and flew from Hanoi to Clark Air Base in the Philippines.
And what do you remember about that time and realizing that you had survived this 6-year ordeal and that you would be able to go home and see a couple of kids that you hadn't seen in 6 years?
Well, it was quite an ecstatic feeling. It was, I don't know, my wife always gets mad at me when I say this. I felt like I got hit over the head with a hammer, but it was that overwhelming.
Indeed it was.
Yeah.
Indeed it was.
So,
and still overwhelming to you today?
Yes.
That you're here and that you've been able to
appreciate life a whole lot.
Watch your family grow up and two wonderful grandchildren.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your service. It's been an honor speaking to you.
You're welcome.
Needless to say, Lieutenant Colonel Al Meyer counts himself lucky to have lived the long life that he has, to have survived the unimaginable ordeal of torture and the separation as a Vietnam POW. His wife, Bobbie, 2 sons and 2 grandkids are indeed the main benefactors of that fortune, as are we all who celebrate freedom every day. We salute Lieutenant Colonel Al Meyer and all veterans who came home and those who did not. And thank you to our underwriter, First National Bank. I'm Tom Turbyville for Lieutenant Colonel Al Meyer. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.